Welcome back to our Monday devlog. First thing today we'd like to show you is that we fixed the seam issues in the mesh generation. And you may notice the planet is the right way up, which, since I didn't want to touch the mesh generation, turned out to be a whole issue. And I added some debug controls so that we can pan around the planet and zoom in and out. If you remember last video, we had a bad seam at both the edge of the image and a hole at the pole. Unfortunately for the Hollow Earthers in the crowd, this has been closed. You'll have to find and break the 72 seals to regain access to the inner paradise. Next, we'll be adding a quick coloring to the planet just to make it more interesting. Our in-development production version of this does more graphically, but this is just intended to give you an idea of what we're doing. At the moment, anything beneath sea level is colored tan, darkening as it gets deeper. Sea level is yellow for sand and quickly fades to green. Higher elevations are gray, and the highest peaks are white. We make a gradient resource and we sample from it based on the point's elevation to color the vertex. We also will add an export variable to control if we paint the mesh like this, so if we're using shader code later, we don't need to bother with the extra compute. Next, we need an ocean, so we'll make a simple sphere mesh, and then we add a material and make it look sort of like a liquid, and finally we scale it to whatever radius the sea level is. You'll notice that there's a lot of issues going on, and in the next section those will be corrected. I had a small bug in the mesh generation from when I did the coloring of the planet, where it was using the color of the terrain to set the height of the vertice. So we got that fixed and it won't be present in the next sections. Now, let's set up a new scene for the flight sim. We'll make the player node the base for the scene and name it Flight Sim. This is because in this tool, we'll be using a floating origin, meaning the player is the core of the world. Everything moves around the player to make it have the highest precision in the physics simulation. Of course, for tiny fights, we actually use a shifting origin so that we can take advantage of more pre-built physics for the player rather than having entirely script-driven behavior. So for the scene, we'll add a mesh instance 3D to the node and call it player plane, a camera as well behind the player plane, and a marker 3D called planet location and offset it beneath the player node. Beneath planet location, we'll add an instance of the planet and configure it similar to how we've had it in the demos. And now we'll add a script called flight sim, and this is what will run our flight sim. The first thing we do is create references to the planet location and the player plane. We'll also add variables for the minimum and maximum speed, acceleration, and the current speed of the plane. We'll also add variables for the minimum and maximum pitch and roll, and the rates for those for the plane. Now we'll go ahead and map our controls for this project with WASD with airplane controls. And back in our script, we add an input function and map the different controls to a vector, which we'll use to adjust the rotation of the plane. We then use the rotation to figure out the direction the plane should be rotated and how much velocity is applied to the planet to simulate that. Speaking of the planet, now that we know the vertical component of the velocity, we can simply add that to the y offset of the planet location, and we also know that the velocity and direction of the player, which we can convert into rotation and apply to the planet beneath us. And now we have the flight sim part done. Now, to make the plane model, we'll add a rectangle for the fuselage, a large thin rectangle for the overhead wing, and 4 small rectangles for the wing supports. With that, we have a plane, which we'll save and assign to the flight sim. All that's left now is to fly around the planet. Okay, well, that's it for today. We may have a week break next week as we focus on finishing up one of our other projects. However, the goal for the next devlog is to showcase some of the building system that'll be present in Tiny Fights, or at least a small version of it. So with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.